Hey everyone, welcome to the Cultivate podcast with the Grove Church. I'm Charlie Lofton, the lead pastor there. And we have got Mark Freeman here with us, who is also on staff with us there and is just a general expert of just wisdom and life and Bible and knowledge. Just an overarching umbrella of all things. What? No, man. Honestly, but seriously, I love the conversations we get to have, not just here on the podcast, but in real life too. And just love the insight that you give, and glad that we are getting to hear from you today as we are here on the podcast. And we are in a series. We're kind of been asking and answering big picture questions, kind of goes along with a series that we did on Sunday mornings in the spring of 2024, leading up to Easter. And it ended on Easter by us talking about, obviously, the resurrection of Jesus. Mm-hmm. It was very novel. It was kind of different this year. Easter, we talked about the resurrection.
It's really surprised. It was a surprise to everybody.
And the big picture question there really is: did Jesus really rise from the dead, or is that just some religious myth that we celebrate? I mean, it's like, every religion has its myth stories. There's all sorts of mythical tales out there of gods and people, and tall tales and fables and all sorts of things out there that you're supposed to be inspired by. Does the resurrection fall into that category, or is it an historical event that we should really believe happened? Not in some mystical, weird faith way, but historically, I just think that is something that happened. Now I have to decide what to do with it. Now, having been around you a long time and having had conversations like this a long time, I can almost in my mind imagine what you're going to say to this question, but you've surprised me before. But I'm going to go ahead and ask it anyway. Either way, either you're going to surprise me and I'm going to love it, or you're going to say exactly what I think you're going to say, and I'm also going to love that.
Segue right,
and I'm going to love that. So either way, why do you believe that Jesus rose from the dead?
To me, it's the evidence of the early followers.
Okay.
Because I just don't see people who are afraid and that are running and that see their leader taken out return with such boldness.
Right.
And are clearly making this claim, knowing it's going to cost them their lives. Not just one lunatic, but
right,
the whole lot of them. That just, for some reason, that just affirms it to me that it would have died. Mm-hmm. It would have just gone away. If like all the others, there've been a lot of claimers and posers through time, and it just kind of goes away. But this one didn't, because those guys and gals seemed to believe it was true to their own life,
Right.
So
you got this picture.
Did that surprise you, or was that what you thought I was going to say?
I thought you were going to talk about your personal. It's just personal.
You assume that's I got you.
That
makes sense.
Because I love Jesus and He loves me, and I thought that's where he's going to go.
That's good to know.
And then it really isn't about the academic facts about it at all. It's just, that's my boy Jesus. He told me he's alive, and he's alive. That's why I believe it. That's what I thought you were going, which is beautiful. But what you also said was great too. I was going to be good either way. Okay. So it's really good. So you got Peter, right? You got Peter, who Jesus predicts, you're going to deny me 3 times. And he does that, including to a slave girl at a fire. Hey, look, it's one of those guys. And he's angry, he's cursing, and he runs away. And then the rooster crows in the way that Jesus said that it would, and he just walks away just devastated, crying. That is not a founder of a great religious movement. So what happens between that moment and Acts chapter 2, the story of Pentecost? What happens in that month and a half? What happens in that period of time that would get him from cursing and crying at a slave girl, denying Jesus, any affiliation with Jesus at all, to standing in Jerusalem in front of thousands and thousands of people saying, you should put your faith in Jesus, ultimately getting arrested many times, tortured many times, and ultimately executed. What happened? There has to be something. Has to be something. And so there are a lot of interesting other theories out there, that people want to use to say, well, this is actually what happened. Because unlike other stories that are like, it could be thousands of years old and be like, ugh, I don't need to debunk it. It's just something somebody made up. There is enough historical evidence to suggest that at a minimum, there were people within Jesus's, just immediately in the aftermath of Jesus' lifetime, there are people that were teaching this. This isn't something that was invented 100 years later or 300 years later. Contemporaries of Jesus were believing and teaching this. And especially then you add to that the Apostle Paul, who was not an original follower, but would have known who he was and was persecuting people who did follow him. And then something happened, and now he's going around telling people, hey, you need to put your faith in this Jesus. There is some sort of event that is happening that is changing these people. And so what is it, if not the actual literal resurrection of Jesus? So we got different theories out there. I don't know how many of these are. You ever been a Josh McDowell fan back in your day?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He was a guy who was very popular when I was in college and wrote a lot of books that were designed to help people answer tough questions. And this was one of his things, was talking about all the different theories that non-Christian academics would have to explain the phenomenon of why these first century Jewish peasants would be saying all of this, because they certainly would lack the boldness, the education, the power to kind of create this sort of movement. So something happened, right? So have you ever heard any of these? Okay, good. So we'll talk about them. The first one is the swoon theory. And so the idea then is that Jesus didn't really die. So he was on the cross. He seemed dead. They buried him. He comes to, comes back out. You're shaking your head no. This is mostly an audio podcast. So
you don't see my head shake?
I do. I see it.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, I mean, it's so funny because this one, when somebody says it's laughable because if you know the story at all and the situation, the ones killing him weren't going to leave any doubt.
Right.
I mean, they couldn't risk that because the claim had been made that he was going to come back.
Right.
Like, I mean, they had to make sure.
Right.
So they did the things, breaking of the legs, sticking the spear. I mean, like they did the things to leave no doubt.
Right.
So it goes against what we, Again,
if we're gonna take the four Gospels as a historically accurate account of the 24 hours before his death, he hadn't probably slept for 2 days. He was beaten with a whip multiple times. He had, he was, put that crown of thorns on him. I mean, I don't know if I'm sure you've seen Passion of the Christ.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, most people said that's a pretty accurate description of what happened to him based on what the Gospels say. I mean, those whips, those cat o' nine tails kind of whips, I mean, those things were just ripping the flesh off of him. Mm. And then he hung for hours on a cross and then was stabbed in the side. I mean, he was dead. Mm-hmm. He was dead. But let's just say that he wasn't fully dead. And then they put him in a tomb and rolled a stone in front of it, and he wakes up. What's phase 2 of the plan? I mean, he's not like, now these hands, now the holes in my hand and my feet and my side and the cuts on my back. I mean, he probably would have died of gangrene.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, there's any.
We're not just.
He's not just walking out of there
in a sanitary
Right. He's like, well, I just got to go to the ER real quick and just get this looked at. He would have not had the strength he wouldn't have the strength to walk out of, just get himself out of bed, much less out of a tomb, much less one that had a stone rolled in front of it and then had guards on. I mean, you would have to say there was no stone, there were no guards, and they only all saw Jesus once because he's going to die. I mean, again, it's a completely different miracle. Now, if he almost died, didn't die, and comes back fully healed from all of that,
and just overcame all of the.
I mean, it's not quite resurrection, but I'd still worship that guy. But it just doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense. All right, what are some others? What are some other of these theories that you've heard?
Oh no, you keep going. I've forgotten the terms that he used. Do any of them talk about the soldiers? And I think is there a different one, or is this the place that we should talk about that? Well, just that those guys that are watching the tomb, like they were given an order that they weren't taking lightly, and the number of those guys, you've recently looked at what was the number?
Yeah, so the idea that the disciples were just going to come steal the body. Again, the people that were 12 hours before, I guess, no, it's by this time we're talking 36 hours. 36 hours or so later, so scared that they're pretending that they don't even know him, are going to sneak past Roman guards, kill the Roman guards, and then roll that stone out of the. There's no sneaking, and then like what? And then at the point in which, let's just say that they did sneak, that they somehow had the courage. Do you die for that? Am I going to let you execute me for a story I made up? Maybe they're all just pot committed. Maybe it only took one of them, and then convince her. But then they all said they saw him. So they would all had to have been in on it, because then none of them saw him. And then, according to this, there were 70 of them that had seen him. So you get all 70 of them together to agree to this, and then ultimately allow themselves to be executed. So they got to come up with the courage to do it in the first place, sneak past the guards, to get that stone out of the way, stay locked down on this. No pushback. No one ratting each other out, and I'll make some sort of blood pact that I'm willing to let them arrest, torture, and execute me. It just doesn't make any sense. Yeah, so that's the stolen body theory. That's one of them. The other one is the hallucination, that they all just hallucinated this. And you're like, I don't think that's how hallucinations work. Right? I mean, even if we could say that they were all grieving together and all on the same drug, they all saw the same thing at the same time. And what a coincidence. Like 11 of them were together and they all hallucinated, but Thomas wasn't there. But then a little bit later, they all had the same hallucination again with Thomas. That's just not how this is not Inception, where you connect each other to the dream monitor and you can all get into the same dream together. That's not how this works. That's just not what this is. And so that one, I don't even know why I don't even know why that one is even a thing. Maybe that gets put on the list because that's the easiest one to debunk. Because it's like, how does that even make sense? All right, so you got that one. You got the hallucination. We got the swoon theory, and ultimately, go ahead.
What about the there was somebody else? You heard that?
Tale of Two Cities? That another dude died for him and came.
Yeah.
Wow.
You haven't heard that one?
Tale of Two. I've never heard of the Tale of Two Cities theory.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with that? That's exactly what. There's two guys that look just alike. One's rich and a bad dude, and one's anyways. And so one of them's supposed to be executed, but the bad one takes the place of the of the good one, so the good one can go live a life. But they weren't really twins, but they looked just a lot. I mean, that kind of
So it wasn't really about two cities.
I can tell you what that means. It is that there is one city, but two different experiences of it, whether you are rich or poor. So it is one city, but really two cities.
Man.
It is a story of social justice.
I thought you were a mathematician, not a...
I was, but I read at least 4 books when I was in high school and college. I've read a lot more since then, but I read that was one of them. I really enjoyed that. It's the kind of book that I enjoyed it so much it should have made me want to read more. Thank you for getting us where we are.
That's not on the McDowell list.
I don't know that I've heard that. So bear it out, play it out for me.
Yeah, that somebody else took his place on the cross, but it wasn't really Jesus. So then when he appeared, he steps out of the shadows and fake. I was actually here all along.
And so then, what happened to the body that was in the tomb?
I'm not saying I know all the details of this.
No. But we're just debunking it. At this point.
It's a great question.
Because then at this point, if all of the facts of the New Testament accounts are true, and there was a body put in a tomb, and there were guards there, and then there's also the story of the women going and seeing it. So somebody would have had to have gotten that body out. So maybe Jesus was bold enough to go, and that's kind of a jerk move. Really inconsistent with who he is. To lie in that way, right? I mean, oof, yeah. Yeah, just again, the thing is, the two things that you have to account for are the radical change in the people and the fact that this was, once you started saying it, it was possible to verify that. Jesus is alive. Oh, you mean that dude in that tomb over there with the big rock in front of it? Let's go check it out. It was a verifiable claim. And so if we're swapping, right, then you go check and you're like, oh, you get exposed. There was nothing they could do to debunk it, because then the guards who were like, man, we don't know what happened. Like, we're just going to bribe you and say that they stole the body. So we're going to bribe you and tell you to say something that is an executable offense. They failed at their duty and they let these dudes steal the body is what they're saying. They would have been executed for that.
Right. And I think that's the part that nobody takes into account, is that this rebellion was at fever pitch, and there was such an intensity and animosity and all of the things that made it like they weren't gonna not verify that it was truly him.
Right.
They were not gonna just leave the stone and just hope for the best. Like they were, all of the opposition was going through great lengths to make sure that he's dead.
Yeah. So the only thing that if the Romans weren't going to check it out, if the Roman side, they didn't care. The Jewish leaders would have. And then that leads you to, okay, well, let's just say that all the accounts in the Gospels are doctored, and somehow the body was stolen, or there was a this dude switcheroo. And now they're saying Jesus rose from the dead. And Paul initially is really angry about this. You want to talk about a dude that would have gone and checked it out? That dude. And the people that were in his Pharisee group, they would have gone to check it out. And apparently they were not able to physically debunk this fact, to the point to where Paul was persuadable. That Paul has that moment in the road to Damascus where he sees the risen Jesus. He's like, he was persuadable, which means that up until that point, no one had been able to disprove this. And if you had been able to disprove it, Paul would have, the Sanhedrin, the leaders of the Jewish council would have, even if the Romans had lost interest in it. which seems unlikely. But even if they had, to see it, what happened to the body? Why the change? And why would Paul buy into it? And so, which the best thing that they have would be if you could say it was a myth that was invented 100 years later. But we know there is no doubt. Historically, you can say contemporaries of Jesus believed this. Mm-hmm. And so you're left with theories that don't make any sense. And so then you have to concoct fantastical stories to disagree with it, to come up with anything else other than seems like this happened. And honestly, for me, and this kind of be where we're in. We'll kind of end where I thought you were going to begin. Anytime I get to a place of discouragement in my faith, Easter is really helpful for me, because there can be times where you're like, everybody does this, where you think, I don't know. Some of this stuff, I don't know. And then I get ready for Easter and I think about, what other alternatives are there? I mean, this is rooted in high historical probabilities. The only other alternatives are highly improbable. And for me, and I don't know if you ever experienced things like this, but for me, it is a journey from the academic to the heart faith encouragement. So I'm asking you again, why do you believe Jesus rose from the dead?
Yeah, I was just thinking that it's also, from our last two sessions, talking about him being the way. That, there's been a lot of claims, and they've been disproven, or they just didn't hold up, or there's been a lot of teachers and gurus and through time, and man, it sets him apart.
Right.
It's a totally different thing that, you're right, could have easily been disproven. That it still stands,
Remember I had this one guy at college, he was like, well, there are stories out there that say the Buddha rose from the dead. I'm not talking about there are stories out there. I mean, there's stories out there that Hercules is the half son of Zeus. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about something being a story. I'm talking about, like, there are contemporary accounts of this having happened. Mm-hmm. That is very different. Well, those gospels weren't written till, it was 20 or 30 years later. Okay? By people who were there, describing what they were like when they were there, and the book of Acts is describing what was happening. Like, these are by people who lived during that time, describing what had happened. And at any point, this could have been falsified. Mm-hmm. I mean, and again, it is just of great encouragement. It's of great encouragement to me. I mean, it is a thing that just has to be reckoned with.
Yeah, and I'll just say on a personal, I've been thinking the whole time we've been talking about this, that you said, what happened to these people from being scared to then being so bold, and both seeing the risen Christ, but then also he made a promise that he was gonna send a helper.
Right.
And that day of Pentecost, and this group that was still afraid, not yet empowered, with a promise of power coming,
right,
then receives this power, and there's a supernatural mark moving forward. And if I talk about personal experience, it's that confirms it for me, that I have seen and experienced the power of a risen Christ who's not dead, who is still very much alive and moving in my world. And so I haven't seen him, I haven't touched the hands,
right?
But I've seen it. I've seen him.
Yeah, like Paul, we've experienced exactly that same sort of thing, where it's like, we come face to face, if not literally, with the risen Jesus, and we receive this power. I mean, the story of Pentecost is a great one. I mean, it's like they receive that power, and they come out there and just say nonsense. And the crowd shouted back, "We know that dude you're talking about. We know where he's buried." I mean, that isn't what happened. It was true enough that a movement was built that day where thousands of people were convinced. And it doesn't, and none of the arguments, Paul's included, were ever, well, we just really weren't sure. It's like, no, that Paul talks about this in Corinthians, which is the passage we looked at Easter. It seemed like that they were doubting the physical resurrection for other sorts of reasons. We're like, no, you got to understand. Hundreds of people saw him. And he says this, some of which are alive today, including me. I mean, he was like, this is a theory. I dare you to test its veracity. And Corinthians is one of the earlier letters. And Paul is saying, this is a verifiable fact. Go check it out. And given that opportunity, and given so many people were given that opportunity, of so much hostility towards it, it could have died.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the other fantastical claims that religions are built upon are not verifiable. Who did Mohammed or Joseph Smith see that told them to write these things down? What tablet did they see? And where did these words come from? Even the people that were supposedly with them didn't see the same things. All we have is what this one dude says about what happened, as opposed to hundreds of people seeing the risen Jesus at that time and telling thousands of people about it, and a movement being built is very, very different than a private revelation that I had or a fantastical story that is concocted generations later. They could have made up whatever they wanted 500 years later and said, and he rose from the dead. But that's just not what this is. And so to me, it is a rock solid fact that we just have to, really the question, what am I going to do with it?
Mm. Hey, just side note, I had never really thought about this, but that so many did come to faith on the day of Pentecost.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought about that. Man, they were also very prepared. If this is true, mm-hmm. and they've heard the stories, and and they're just sitting there, like there is already an anticipation of,
right.
Just never thought how and how the opposite would also be true. If there was evidence against it, then they would have immediately.
Yeah, there were a few hundred people there that had seen Jesus. Everybody had heard him talk about it.
Right.
And so then whatever that nonsense was with the fire and the loudness and the languages is like, okay, now we're going to kind of hear what happened here. And there was enough interest in the air to be like, well, that makes more sense than what anybody else is saying.
Mm. Factually.
And again, not just factually, the power of the Holy Spirit building on facts. Mm-hmm. So to me, this is the point of Easter, and we'll kind of wrap up with this. It's like, this is not putting our faith in a myth that has power, like a really powerful fable or tall tale. This is us putting our faith in the most significant historical event that has ever happened, that changed the course of history of the world forever. And that's what we put our faith in. And so I encourage you not only to believe in this fact, but to do something about it, to put your faith and trust in the Jesus that reconciled us to God through his death and gives us hope for this life and the next by being the conqueror of death. And so thank you so much for joining us, Mark, as always. Thank you for joining us. Love your insight and your heart as always. And for all you guys who are listening, if you're part of the Grove, we're so glad that you listen. If you are not part of the Grove, we would love to connect with you in some way. You can find us at thegrovechurch.org/connect. Find out about our Sunday services, both in person and online. events that we've got going on, and ways to just contact us if you'd like. So any way we can, we'd love to help you. So please let us know. And again, it's Charlie and Mark, and thank you for joining us.